Terrified Hungarian female POWs froze in silence when Canada's polite guards stepped toward them. April 23, 1945. Austrian countryside, 0347 hours. 200 Hungarian female POWs froze in perfect, breathless silence the moment they heard the boots. Canadian boots. The rumor had reached them hours ago. The next army that opens this car decides whether we live or die. But no one said Canada. No one ever said Canada. Inside the locked cattle car, the air is a choking mix of urine, sweat and fear, thick enough to taste. Hajnalka Szilágyi, a 23-year-old radio operator with shaking hands, clamps her palm over her mouth. If she sobs, the younger girls will break. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. The train slows, stops. A shuttered wooden coffin hanging in the dark. Senior Auxiliary Officer Orsolia Tamas presses two nurses against the wall and whispers the only rule they all agreed on. No screaming, no matter what they do. Outside, gravel shifts, boots reposition, not rushing, not shouting, too calm, too polite, too foreign. Piroska Horváth, the veteran nurse who survived the siege of Budapest, puts her eye to a sliver between the planks. One look at the silhouettes outside makes every drop of blood in her body run cold. Not Soviet helmets, not German coats, not the uniforms from the rumors that whispered of torture. These men are strangers, and that is worse. Someone outside clears his throat. Then comes the sound every woman fears most, the slow, deliberate rasp of a metal latch sliding open. The car shudders. Light explodes in. 200 women recoil, shielding their faces, crushed against the far wall. And then, a sound none of them know how to interpret. Paper rustling, a clipboard, followed by a voice so calm, so casual, so politely apologetic it freezes them harder than gunfire ever could. Horváth? Is there a Piroska Horváth here? A pause. Ladies, apologies for the delay. If everyone could step forward in an orderly fashion, please. We have hot tea and medical staff waiting. They don't move, not one woman, because politeness was not in any of the horror stories, because kindness was never an option in war, because suddenly the question is not, what will they do to us, but something far more terrifying. Why are the Canadians being this gentle? And what do they know that the women don't? Piroska expected the processing to break her. She had prepared herself. Strip searches, hands everywhere, the rituals of dominance that turned women into cattle. She had seen it before, not personally, but in the hollow eyes of girls who stumbled back to field hospitals after being questioned by advancing forces. She squared her shoulders. Do not cry. Do not give them the satisfaction. The Canadian officer, a woman with grey-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, gestured toward a tent. Medical examinations, one at a time. Your privacy will be respected. Privacy! The word hung in the air like a foreign language. Inside the tent, a female doctor with kind eyes and tired hands conducted the exam behind a curtain. No men, no audience. The doctor asked permission before touching her. May I check your lungs? Any injuries I should know about? Piroska's throat tightened. She nodded, mute. Afterward, in the holding area, a woman in military uniform, Sergeant Agnes MacLeod, her name tag read, moved through the rows of shell-shocked prisoners. She handed each woman a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Hajnalka opened hers first, gasped. Sanitary napkins, soap, a comb, toothpaste. Sergeant MacLeod paused at their group. If you need more, just ask. We've got plenty in supply. She said it like it was normal, like they were guests at a hotel, not prisoners of war. Orsolia stared at the supplies in her lap. Her hands that had signed orders, commanded subordinates, survived sieges, began to shake. Because this they had no training for. The transfer happened at dawn. The women were herded onto a military transport truck, expecting young soldiers with hard eyes and harder hands. Instead, their escort consisted of men who looked like they should be retired. Veterans Guard of Canada, the insignia read. Corporal Duncan Finlay moved slowly, favouring his left knee. He had a grey moustache and wore WWI ribbons on his chest that were older than most of the prisoners. When he climbed into the truck bed to sit across from them, he groaned audibly. "Bloody arthritis," he muttered in English, then caught himself, looked at the terrified faces staring back at him. "Right. Sorry, ladies. Long trip ahead." He pulled out a thermos, unscrewed the cap. The smell of tea filled the cramped space. He offered the cup to Piroska. She stared at him. This man, this guard, this enemy, this captor was offering her tea, like she was a passenger on a train, like they were sharing a compartment, not a prison transport. "No?" Finlay shrugged, took a sip himself. "Suit yourself. Gets cold up north. You'll want the warm drinks when we get there, trust me." He said it conversationally. Complained about the weather. Mentioned his wife's terrible cooking. Asked if any of them spoke English because his back was killing him, and conversation helped pass the time. Hajnalka whispered in Hungarian, "Why isn't he—" She didn't finish. Couldn't. Piroska understood. The cruelty they had prepared for. Torture, rape, humiliation. They had armor against those. But this? A man with kind eyes offering tea and complaining about his joints. They had no defense against kindness. The train journey was supposed to last a few hours, maybe a day. On the third morning, Piroska pressed her face to the window and saw the same thing she had seen for 72 hours. Trees, endless, indifferent trees stretching to the horizon in every direction. No towns, no roads, no signs of human civilization beyond the iron rails beneath them. Hajnalka counted telegraph poles to stay sane. Osolia mapped their route on a scrap of paper, trying to calculate distance. The numbers made no sense. They should have crossed the entire country by now. Corporal Finlay noticed their confusion. He pulled out a folded map, spread it across his lap, pointed to a tiny dot on the vast expanse of green. "We're about here. Maybe. Hard to say. Another day or so to camp." Hajnalka stared at the map, then at the window, then back at the map. That's impossible. We've been traveling for 3 days." Finlay nodded. "Welcome to Canada, miss. Big place. Lot of nothing." Piroska felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Something worse. They weren't being taken to a camp. They were being erased, swallowed by a continent so vast that escape wasn't forbidden. It was simply meaningless. You could run for 100 kilometers and die without ever seeing another human being. The trees didn't care about nationality. The forest didn't distinguish between Hungarian and Canadian. Out there, in that green infinity, they were all equally nothing. Osolia folded her map, stopped calculating. What was the point? They had already disappeared. Camp 132 materialized from the wilderness like a bureaucratic hallucination. Barbed wire, wooden barracks, guard towers, but no town, no village nearby, just forest pressing against the perimeter like a living wall. The women were assembled in the compound yard, 200 pairs of eyes fixed on the platform where their new commandant stood. Major Catherine Byrne was not what they expected. She was a woman, mid-50s, grey hair, nurse's insignia from the Great War pinned to her collar. She held no rifle, no swagger stick, just a clipboard and reading glasses. Her voice carried across the silent yard without shouting. "You are prisoners of war. That is a legal designation, not a moral judgment. You will be housed, fed, and treated according to the Geneva Conventions. You are not our enemies. You are our responsibility." She gestured to the fence. "Those are not to keep you in. They are to keep the wilderness out. Bears, wolves, winter temperatures that will kill you in minutes. The nearest town is 200 kilometers through trackless bush. There are no roads, no trails. Escape is not punished because escape is suicide. Peroska looked beyond the fence. The trees stood like silent sentinels. Major Byrne continued, "You will be safe here. You will be fed. You will be warm. And when this war ends, you will go home." She said it like a promise, like she believed it. But Peroska heard something else. "You are already home. You just don't know it yet." The first breakfast arrived at 0700 hours. Metal trays slid through the serving window. Peroska stared at hers. Scrambled eggs, 2 thick slices of bread with butter, real butter, not the grey lard substitute, jam, bacon, a cup of coffee that actually smelled like coffee, not roasted grain husks. Hajnalka picked up her fork, put it down, picked it up again. Are they fattening us for something? Or Solya was doing calculations in her head. Peroska could see it, the same mental arithmetic they had all learned to survive. Calories, protein, fat content. This single meal contained more nutrition than a week's rations in Budapest during the final siege, more than their own military had provided when they were actively serving. A young woman 2 tables over began to cry, not from relief, from rage. Sergeant MacLeod noticed, approached with concern. "Is the food not to your liking? We can arrange—" "Why?" The girl's voice cracked. "Why are you feeding us like this?" MacLeod looked genuinely confused. "It's standard rations, same as what our troops get." Standard. The word hung there like an obscenity. They were being fed better as prisoners than as soldiers, better than their families back home who were starving under Soviet occupation. The Axis had told them the Allies were barbaric. That capture meant death or worse. Nobody mentioned abundance. Nobody said the enemy would defeat you with bacon and real coffee. Peroska picked up her fork, ate mechanically. Each bite tasted like betrayal. Major Byrne announced the work program on their 5th day. Voluntary. Extra rations for those who participated. Sewing, cooking, forestry assistance, camp maintenance. The compound split immediately. Some women refused on principle. Collaborators, they hissed. Traitors to Hungary. Others saw it differently. Survival requires adaptation. Peroska volunteered for the infirmary. The Canadian nurse, a woman named Dorothy Grant with flower-white hair and steady hands, looked at her credentials. Military nurse, Budapest siege, field amputations, trauma surgery under artillery fire. "Right then," Dorothy said, "you'll start with inventory. If you prove competent, we'll move you to patient care. No ceremony, no suspicion, just work." By the 2nd week, Peroska was suturing wounds. A guard had cut himself on barbed wire. Dorothy handed her the needle without hesitation. Watched her technique, nodded approval. "Clean work. You've done this before." They fell into a rhythm. Dorothy taught her Canadian medical terminology. Peroska shared field techniques for limited supplies. They argued about sterilization protocols, agreed on morphine dosages. One afternoon, treating a prisoner's infected foot, Dorothy asked, "What made you join the military?" Peroska paused. "I wanted to help people." "Same." Dorothy threaded a new suture. "Funny how that works." It was a small thing, a shared sentence. But something shifted. The infection didn't care about nationality. The suture didn't distinguish between Hungarian and Canadian flesh. Medicine was medicine. A wound was a wound. Peroska realized she hadn't thought about escape in days, not because it was impossible, because she had stopped seeing guards and prisoners. She saw colleagues, and that was far more dangerous than barbed wire. February 1946. The thermometer outside the barracks read -35 Celsius. The world beyond the windows disappeared into white nothing. Snow didn't fall. It simply existed, suspended in air too cold to let it settle. The hardcore nationalists, women who still sang Hungarian anthems and refused to speak English, tried to maintain their defiance. But ideology requires energy, and energy requires warmth. Corporal Finlay shuffled into the common room, cursing under his breath. His face was red, his moustache frosted white. "Bloody furnace is acting up again. Wife's going to kill me when I get home. Promised I'd fix ours before winter, and here I am, 2,000 kilometers away, freezing my arse off in the exact same situation." He said it to no one in particular, just needed to complain to someone who'd listen. Orsolya, who had been stubbornly silent for weeks, looked up. "The pilot light?" Finlay blinked. "You know furnaces." "My father was a heating engineer. Check the gas line for ice." He stared at her, then laughed, a short, surprised bark. "Right, I'll do that, thanks." After he left, one of the nationalist women glared at Orsolya. "Collaborator?" Orsolya didn't look up from her knitting. "The forest doesn't care what flag you saluted. It just wants to kill you equally. Ask me again when it hits -40. The woman opened her mouth, closed it. Outside, the white void pressed against the glass. Inside, everyone moved closer to the stove. The mail truck arrived twice a month. The women lined up like communicants at church, hoping for letters that never came. Hajnalka had written to her parents 17 times. Careful letters, nothing political. Just, "I am alive, I am safe, please write back." When the envelope finally arrived in June, it wasn't from her parents. Soviet postal stamp, official letterhead, a single paragraph in bureaucratic Hungarian informing her that her parents had been relocated for political re-education. No forwarding address, no timeline, no proof they were even alive. She read it twice, then walked calmly to the latrine and screamed until her throat bled. Piroska found her there an hour later, still holding the letter. "They're gone," Hajnalka whispered. "We survived this. We survived the polite Canadians and their tea and their bacon and their kindness. And for what? My parents are in a Soviet camp somewhere, or dead, and I'm here, safe, fed, warm." She laughed, a broken, terrible sound. "We prepared for monsters and got Clarks. We wasted all our fear on the wrong enemy." Piroska had no answer, because Hajnalka was right. They had survived, but Hungary hadn't. The war they fought was over. The country they fought for was gone, and they were sitting in a Canadian prison camp, eating better than they ever had in uniform. That night, Piroska lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling. What were we even fighting for? The question had no answer, only silence. Spring 1946. The snow melted. The repatriation offers arrived in neat manila envelopes. Major Bayern assembled them in the yard. Her voice was steady, bureaucratic, professional to the end. "The war is over. You are no longer prisoners. Those wishing to return to Hungary may do so. Transportation will be arranged. However," she paused, "Hungary is now under Soviet administration. We cannot guarantee your safety upon return." She held up another form. "Those who wish to remain may apply for Canadian residency. It is not a gift. It is paperwork. You will be processed like any other immigrant." Half the women chose the Soviet zone immediately. Family, home, the familiar horror over the unknown kindness. Hajnalka was not among them. Piroska watched her sign the residency application with shaking hands, then signed her own. That evening, she walked to the forest's edge. The trees stood silent, indifferent. She had spent a year waiting for cruelty that never came, preparing for violence that arrived as tea and medical exams and furnace complaints. If you don't want to miss stories like this, please subscribe. And, if possible, share this with someone who loves untold history. She wasn't defeated by soldiers. She was defeated by clerks who offered her a choice. The forest didn't care, Canada didn't care, and somehow that vast indifference had saved her life. She turned back toward the barracks, toward Dorothy, who was waiting to review tomorrow's patient charts, toward Finlay, who would complain about his back, toward a future she never imagined wanting, not with gratitude, but with the exhausted relief of finally setting down armor she no longer needed.